So, good afternoon, everyone. We'll be tackling about the global demography, and of course, we are the group 6. So, when we say global, it is worldwide. When we say demography, it is the statistical study of the human populations, examines the size, structures, and movements of population over space and time. It uses methods from history, economics, anthropology, sociology, and other fields. One of an example are age, race, ethnicity, gender, marital status, income, education, and employment. What should we learn about our report? Is all about demography, which I tackled earlier. COVID-19 pandemic. Coronavirus has resulted in numerous consequences worldwide. It highlights the pandemic's impact on the components of population change. Morality, fertility, and migration are the concept of a population change. And when we say overpopulation, the carrying capacity, the numbers of people might be more than the available essential materials for survival, such as transport, water, shelter, food, or social amenities. And when we say reproductive health, and in this, which connects reproductive traits with population densities and behavior, may be partly explained by increasing population densities. And lastly, women rights. Achieving gender equity globally is crucial to meeting development goals, reducing human suffering, and solving our biggest environmental problems. Next slide, demographic perspectives of the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. So in this, 1 year after being declared a global pandemic on March 11, 2020, the effect of the coronavirus on the world population is considerable. In addition to its far-reaching social, economic, and political consequences, the pandemic has greatly impacted the key components of world demographics. So again, the concept is morality, fertility, and migration. And when I say morality, by the mid-March 2020, these are the reported number of COVID-19 deaths worldwide. So when I say fertility has influence in many different countries, and we say migration as a result of travel bans, restrictions, and lockdowns, migration across international borders came to a virtual standstill in early 2020. So the coronavirus continues to challenge governments worldwide, and several worrisome concerns are emerging during the second year of the pandemic. So the pandemic has caught most of the world unprepared. So the world was again unprepared for the COVID-19 because it is clear that the majority of developed countries were unprepared to COVID-19 with widespread shortage in medical equipment and hospital capacity. One can only imagine the situation in developing countries that struggled to provide basic health care services before the outbreak. The next slide, as you can see in the picture, it illustrates the family and the children. So now the question, the child can be an economic asset or a burden to a family. So what are economic assets? This more likely about cash and cash equivalents, certificates of deposit, checking and savings accounts, money market accounts, physical cash. treasurer, bills, property or land, and in any structure that is permanently attached to it. And another question, is a child an asset? Our children are our nation's most valuable assets. They represent the bright future of our country and hold our hopes for a better nation. Our children are also the most vulnerable members of society. Another question, can a child be an economic asset? Among rural families in many developing countries, children have an economic value. Children could be economic assets in rural areas if parents could keep them working for the household long enough. So basically, they are not the burden to the family. Even when the children are uneconomical or economical, they continue to provide physiological and social values to their parents. So these values in the course of the transition in the value of children, but they increase rather than decrease in importance. So there are several aspects of socio-economic development affect the economic contribution that the children make. These include education, rising incomes, and urbanizations. And also, the next slide, these are the people who examined the differing versions between rural and urban communities. So, Claudio Ilastro A and Abiniales Patricio N. So most people have a clear impression, they say, most people have a clear impression of what the cities, towns, and countryside look like, both physical and in terms of the lives of the people who live there. So they compares rural and urban areas statistically for themes such as working, earnings, services, and population using geographical classification. So the next slide, since we were talking about communities, now let's talk about what is in the rural and urban communities. Also the rule about in their area, including their demographic study. So rural communities is an open swath of a land that has a few homes or other buildings and not very many people. A rural area's population density is very low. Many people live in a city, or shall we say urban area. One of example of a rural area is small settlements including villages, hamlets, or small towns are often surrounded by the rural areas. Wildlife is also much more common in rural areas due to the lack of people and buildings. So what is the role of rural? Rural development is important not only for the majority of the population residing in the rural areas, but also for overall income of expansion of the nation. So how describe a rural community in terms of its demography? The area's population density is very low. So speaking of the size, no, kasi their density is very low. So when we say urban communities, it is one that's in a city or a town, lots of people live there, and there are lots of different kinds of buildings close together. So an area is a region surrounding a city. Most inhabitants of urban areas have non-agricultural jobs, are very developed, meaning there is a density of human structures such as houses, commercial buildings, roads, bridges, and railways. Can refer to towns, cities, and suburbs. So what is the rule again to the urban community. So these buildings and spaces play an important role in providing a focus for communities. So since they have a density of population and networks of activities, cities have public buildings and space for government, organized religion, education, commerce, social interaction, cultural events, and public services. Something which can individual thought of us, an area with a high density of population, an area with the availability of a basic requirements, an area of a good resources. The area has a lots of opportunity of employment and such an area which can be considered as a life-giving for luxurious desires of humans. So urban demographic. So, urban population refers to the population inhabiting areas that have a greater population density than rural areas and are overall more compact than rural areas. In simple terms, it's the people living in the cities. So, now, how can you tell if a land is urban or rural? If the agricultural land is covered under such an area, it shall be an urban agricultural land and will become taxable. Is a rural agricultural land taxable? Therefore, any gains from its sales are not taxable under the head capital gains. If the land is outside the area specified in the said notification, the land shall be rural agricultural land and shall not be taxable. Hence, the land distance is to be considered as a road distance. So, now let's differentiate between rural and urban. So, it is a settlement where population is very high and has the features of a built environment, an environment that provides basic facilities of humans activity is known as urban. And when we say rural, is the geographical region located in the outer parts of the cities or towns.